Welcome to Board Gamers Anonymous, the podcast about board gamers and the insane fun we have at the table together. This is Chris.
Hey, and this is Anthony.
And this is episode 490, BGA Hall of Fame games, our top 10. We'd like to thank all our Patreon backers for helping us bring you a brand new episode. Hey friends, we're back again, and this episode, in some ways, is the bestest of all episodes because it's the BGA Hall of Fame games.
We're doing it. Yeah, so we're doing our lead up to our top 100 because it is episode 500 and we figured, hey, one episode is not enough to capture all of this. So let us back up, build up to it, and break these things down and talk about them in a little more detail. But step one is let's retire some games from our lists. Let's talk about the games that are absolutely at the top, Hall of Fame games that we will always love, always be willing to play, but maybe have just elevated themselves beyond being ranked on a day-to-day, month-to-month, week-to-week, year-to-year list. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about 10 games that are kind of elevated above our top 100. These are the best of the best.
Absolutely. And since we just did our 11th year anniversary, we've done 11 years of this, 11 years of reviewing, 11 years of the list, a lot of top 10s, a lot of top 100s. I think I can't even imagine. I mean, I look at Board Game Geek where I typically keep my reviews, although I certainly do forget games from time to time and obviously the number of plays, but like thousands of reviews, right? Over, going to be 500 podcasts on this one, not to mention all the other podcasts and all the other written articles and things like that. So, a depth and a breadth of knowledge. And at this point, I think it's taken a while. We've talked about this for several years, doing something like this, because we want to keep the top 100 fresh and new and just like being like the ultimate hotness list. So I think it got to that point finally, where stuff was so super hot for so super long, and then like in the void, and just in time, it's just like it's now ready. It's now ready to ascend. It's done its job.
Yeah, and you'll get it. You'll get it when we get there. I actually, so if you head on over to the Patreon, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here for the plug, but if you head on over to the Patreon, I did a bonus episode this last week, and I'm going to do this every week or two through this 10-week period of kind of like a behind the scenes of building this out. So I didn't actually know what I was going to put in my Hall of Fame. I wasn't really sure how to get to that point. And so I did a bonus episode where I kind of walked through it and I talked through it and I got most of the way there. I think I picked 4 of the 5 on that episode. And the 5th one I just wasn't sure on yet. I am now because we're recording now, but at the time I wasn't sure. So you can go check that out. And then each week as we kind of go through the top 100, I'm going to be like showing, here's how I develop the top 100. Here's how I break it down, like for myself. Because a lot of people ask that, like, how do you make a top 100 games? What does that look like? How chaotic is it? So check that out. It is a video, so you can watch the process as well.
Ooh. Backstage, inside stuff.
I know. Yeah, I was like, I'm doing this anyways. Why don't I just record it and narrate it? I was like, I have 30 minutes. I need to sit down and figure this out. Record. So.
Gotcha. All right. Well, that's the big feature review. But before we get into all to that fun, Anthony, let's talk about what everyone's talking about. Let's talk about our question of the week.
All right. So if we're doing our Hall of Fame, we asked everybody, what is your personal Hall of Fame? What is an all-timer game that you will never not appreciate? A game that maybe has elevated itself out of consideration, right? The thing about a top 100 is things can rise and fall. Like we'll talk about this over the next few weeks, but there's a few games that were really high on my list at one point that are no longer on the list at all, that I don't even like anymore. So what kind of games would never reach that point that you will always be willing to play, that are always going to be at the top? And part of that is you need to play games for a long time, I think, to get to that point.
Sure.
Because I think when we get into the hobby, we all have that game. You're like, no, I'll love this forever. And 2 years later, you're like, nah.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. I played other stuff. It was fine.
Sure.
So I asked people that question. What game kind of fits that bill? So hitting the Patreon, our backers over there, we have Drew who mentions War Room. And Drew's mentioned War Room a bunch of times, so I believe him because he keeps
Yes.
bringing this game up. I don't know how big War Room is, Drew, but maybe you have to like bring it or we have to find a copy at PAX when we're there because I want to see this game. So Drew mentions each game has epic and memorable moments. Many speak of TI4 as the quintessential epic game experience. War Room has teams and less complexity, making it easier to get to the table. Looking forward to trying Imperial Borders as a pseudo sequel.
Nice.
So just it sounds amazing. I would like to try it.
Absolutely. Same.
Ryan mentions, as much as I love exploring new games in the hotness, I will forever own and play Concordia.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
such, yeah, and we talk about this a lot, kind of almost in that same bucket. It's such a clean, streamlined game with a great decision space while also pushing meaningful player interaction. It has a myriad of maps and expansions, and we never get tired of it. Such a fun and fantastic game.
Very
Uh,
true.
Absolutely, yeah. So over on the Facebook as well, we actually had a bunch of comments, so about 20 or so. So thank you everybody who responded here. Rodney mentions Zaya. I know Anthony will pick this as well. Yeah, Rodney, you know me so well. But I do love it though. Great sandbox space adventure with beautiful components. Um, I feel like sometimes people post these because they just want me to read it. Rodney's like, I'm gonna make Anthony say in his own voice, "I love Zaya," and then we can
Oh,
clip
no.
that.
It's going to come back to
uh,
haunt you later, man.
I know. Like, we'll get to it. We might have a future episode where we talk about games that are the opposite of the
Hall of Fame.
Hall of Fame. Yeah.
Okay.
David mentions Bruges as the most played Feld game,
Mm-hmm.
and because it's quite luck dependent, so anything can happen.
That's one of my picks. I'm there with that.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. You talk about Bruges a lot.
Oh yeah, love
Um,
Bruges. I'm all about Bruges.
yeah, yeah. Not me,
Just,
but I'm
just
with you, man.
just like you're all about Zaya.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly. We're on the same page.
I still have that picture of you playing Zaya. It's a good picture too.
Do I look like I'm about to light the game on fire?
I don't think so yet.
Okay.
I think you do see the light, dying in your eyes, but
We did play for like 4.5 hours.
we
It
did.
took like 2 hours before I realized I hated it.
Hey
So
man, do you remember who won that game?
it wasn't me.
It was me.
Yeah, of course it was you. I remember that weekend. I won like every game we played, and then we played Zaya, and you're like, it's just because you lost. And I'm like, no, it's because it's terrible.
And also because you lost.
Maybe because I lost. Yeah, I don't
That's
know.
fine.
Larry says all-time best design and replayability, probably Age of Steam.
Oh yeah, sure.
Age of Steam, very great game, way up there.
Classic.
Max's Ticket to Ride got me into gaming just a few short months ago at the tender age of 60.
Whoa.
Awesome, Max. Welcome to the hobby.
Yeah, definitely.
Brian says Power Grid. Yes,
Sure.
Power Grid, great game. Daniel mentioned Spirit Island, perfect cooperative game if you play without events, that is. Also throws in StarCraft, the board game.
Oh,
Perfect
love
tunes
it.
on a map game. It is not, but it's light years better than any other game in the genre.
It's true.
All right. Andrew mentioned Juicy Fruits.
Oh
Amazing
yeah,
game with a variety of mechanics with a lot of replayability.
I have that game.
It's a good game.
I love it.
You don't hear much about it. I think it's too abstract. That's why we don't hear much about it. But
Sure.
it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
Pete says, for a perfect simple game, I'll always enjoy Guillotine.
Oh yeah.
One of the very first games I bought without knowing almost anything at all about board gaming. It was bought on a whim from a game shop in Norwich, England, just because it looked fun and I was looking for something to play with other boarding school staff on evenings off. That's a great game. That's one of the early ones we played as well.
It is. We talked about that recently too. We on our Paris
Oh yeah,
retrospective. we threw that in there because it's
Yeah.
one of those games where it's like, I should not like this. This should be a bad game, but it's great.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's just cute. It's fun. I had so in my class that I teach, that's board games as rhetoric, I task the students with going out and finding a game on their own and playing it as a group, and then they have
Mhm.
to report on it. And last year, not this last year, but the year before, a group did a report on Guillotine.
Oh, it's
I don't know
great.
where they found it. I don't know how they found it. The game's been out of print for a while, but they presented like a detailed report of their play and the rhetorical elements of the game, and I was like, this is amazing. Can I use your presentation?
That's great.
Because I hadn't even thought about that game in years.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
I still remember the lowest card in that deck, Anthony, is I don't know if I should say this. You can beat me if you want. It's Piss Boy. Am I correct on that?
yeah, Piss Boy, Piss
Yeah.
Boy.
Yeah.
I recall. It's a good game.
Yeah.
All right, some other answers here. We have Andres mentions Carcassonne. Great entry game for so many of my friends. It can be a real mean game if played with some hardcore gamers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Jeremiah also mentions Ticket to Ride. Got him into the hobby. Damien also throwing Bruges on the list. One of my first Felds. Taught it to
Yes.
my daughter, who was in
My
high school at the
people.
time.
I love my people.
Yep. I will say though, they at the end they say Hamburg is probably better,
Oh no.
but we like the OG Bruges.
The artwork
So
is certainly much better.
yeah, take it
Yeah.
as you will. Scott mentions New Bedford. Interesting theme, building up the town with worker placement spots and a good expansion. Haven't thought about New Bedford in a long time.
Sure.
Lucy mentions Roma and Arena Roma 2.
Yeah.
Great Stefan Feld games, 2-player card game.
I
I
got
still
them
have my
both.
copy of Arena Roma somewhere.
I love that game. It's great.
Yeah, very good. Barack mentioned Spirit Island. Over
Excellent.
600 plays of it, and it's still
Oh,
fresh. Okay, you win.
nice.
You win, Barack. I've not played the game that many times. I love it, but I've not played the game that many times. Chris says, I'll never turn down a game of Above and Below. Nathan
Sure.
mentions Aeon's End and Spirit Island. And then last but not least, Bob says Concordia.
Sure.
So nice variety of games there. These are people's favorite all-timers. Like if you're newish to the hobby, a lot of these games might
That's
be
a
worth
great
checking
list.
out. Yeah.
That's a great list. Thank you, everybody. I mean, Above and Below is my favorite Red Raven game,
Mm.
Ryan Lockett, and it's surprising because it's I think the first one that came out, if I remember correctly.
Of the storytelling ones, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, like it was Above and Below and then Near and Far and then
and
Sleeping
Isle.
Gods.
There was an
Or
Isle.
Islebound. Yeah, yeah.
Islebound was one of those, and now he's into the big, massive kind of campaign games.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but Above and Below, I remember. I don't want to spoil a really good story moment from it, but there was like, in particular, very good, interesting story moment in that game that clearly I thought it was going left, and I made a choice thinking it was going left, and it went right. I was like, and I was like, it was really surprising. The writing in that game is quite good, and you don't
Mm.
expect that. So, very very talented, extremely talented person. So, yeah, no, that was great. All right. Well, again, thank you all for hitting us up. Our social media is everywhere. Again, don't forget our website, boardgamersanonymous.com. It's not just a website that hosts the podcast, a lot of great content, a lot of great links, and just a lot of great ways to get people involved in tabletop gaming. So, send them a link with the website, and they're going to get more about tabletop gaming than almost any website out there. All right, Anthony. So that's everything that's going out with our friends out there. Let's talk about our acquisition disorders.
All right. So the game I want to talk about this week is a bit of a weird one.
Okay.
In as much as any game can be weird, because they're all weird if you think about it.
Sure.
This is a new one from GMT Games, designed by Ted Racer. And Ted has worked on a bunch of other stuff like Paths of Glory, Barbarossa to Berlin, like a lot of war games, the GMT favorite.
Mm-hmm.
This one, however, is a little different than the other games Ted has worked on. It is called I, Napoleon.
Okay.
So it is a solo only historical role playing card game. Sorry, where you play the role of Captain Bonaparte, not yet Emperor or anything else. Right. So you're going all the way back to 1793. The French Revolution has just happened, and you are a captain in the French army. So how do you work your way up? How do you work your way through? Like, obviously, Napoleon took a very specific path to where he ended up in his life. Where will you end up? So it's a very fascinating type of game because solo RPGs are a growing thing. Like if you look at RPGs on Kickstarter, it's definitely a growing like subcategory of like having solo modes for RPGs or just
Mm-hmm.
solo modules in general.
Sure.
Um, like the Cosmere RPG that's running right now that has almost $10 million in backing. It has like 400 comments being like solo mode, please, and to the
Wow.
point where they've said we're looking into it. Which I find fascinating because it makes me think of like choose your own adventure books. Like, and I'm sure
Yes.
it's more complicated than that, I'm sure, but
Mm-hmm.
it's cool. Like you sit down and you do a thing together by yourself. So I, Napoleon is that, but it's taking like the card driven game mechanics that you get in a lot of GMT style games, and it's using that to like help build out your story. So there's still a puzzle to it. There's still like war game elements there, right? It's still a GMT game. It's not like a pure storytelling thing. Like you look at the cards are so detailed. They have all these different options on them, and they have this big sprawling board and all these chits that go everywhere and kind of help you decide what's going to happen at each point. But at the end of the day, it is effectively a role playing game. You are role playing as Napoleon, trying to see how you do getting through, all these things that he faced in his life. I am just fascinated. Like Napoleon's interesting as an individual, as a time period, as a historical artifact. But I'm just more than that. I'm interested in like how they built this game
Mm-hmm.
and how it plays. Uh, Obviously, it's been known about for a long time. GMT does their P500. It
Yes.
just it didn't hit my radar at any point because it's just not a time period I typically look for games for. But now that it's out and people are playing it and I'm hearing reviews, I'm like, oh, I really want to check this out. So uh, it's on the list now. It's a relatively lightish game, but it's still, up to 4 hours because it's, a GMT game. That's how they roll. Hopefully I get a chance to check it out. Like it might be sold out at this point. If not, I might track it down. But they always reprint these things if they're popular. So Napoleon, very interesting new style of game. I'm sure we'll see more of these because it seems to be very popular, and GMT tends to lean into those when they're popular.
I saw this and I almost dropped it in directly for you because I was like, this is an Anthony game. I'm like
Right?
100% an Anthony game, and I guess I'm not wrong. 'Cause it just
No, yeah. I got an email like 2 days ago, and I was like, oh my gosh, this looks amazing. So I gotta find it.
yeah, it looks good. I was even tempted a little bit on that as well. So no, really excited about that. So I'm glad, looking forward to coming out. And they know how to do those.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
no small feat, and this was like just like a generally a great accomplishment across the board.
Yep.
Speaking of which, Anthony, I was just blown away by this game that I'm going to be talking about next, and it seems like you backed it. So, uh, this is Chicago '68, a board game about revolutionary spectacle, and civil disorder amid the Democratic National Convention riots of 1968. I don't know if you're out there and you are following or just recently following the Democratic Convention, which just recently wrapped up in Chicago. But there was a lot of talk about '68 and about the Democratic Convention that happened there, and all the riots and the corruption and the challenges that were going on. Just a lot of really interesting dynamics that were happening. Just and they were predicting that we would see some of that because there was an immense amount of protesters fighting against the genocide that was going on that's going on in Gaza, and close to 10,000 people. Chicago has a large Palestinian population there, and obviously people are trying to move things along to help support the people that are all the people out there in that region that are suffering, and all the victims that are dealing with that situation. So watching the news, I got to see the political protests. I got to see the sit-ins. I got to see the political actions, the media outreach, the all the different TikTokers and social media people, and the lobbying efforts that were going on, and how people in the community were supporting each other, and how the Democratic Party was taking that or pushing back against that, and to actually have a game that looks at the most dramatic ruckus period in history, um 68, and the riots and the cops, like currently what's happened at the current Democratic convention was nothing. It was no problems, no issues,
Yeah.
as far as I know. This was the complete opposite. This was anarchy across the way. Some of that was planned and staged, some of that was the mayor's policy, and it's just such a really dramatic period. Now, that alone would make it an interesting game, an interesting piece to talk about and figure out. What I'm really kind of taken by here is the artwork, the graphic design, and the game mechanics. Because I was like, oh, this is an interesting historical piece. I'll take a look at it. And as I was going through the game, I was just like, wow, they actually created you can create a co-op game, but then there's also a competitive game, 1 to 4 players, and you get to play the different factions that are at play. There's tableau building, there's hand building, you're building your hands with cards, asymmetric factions, so that each of the factions plays differently, and they're looking for different goals as far as their successes are concerned. But they all share concerns as far as area control. So they're all, jockeying for position as far as that. Uh, I love the cards here. I love the actions here. This reminds me of Watergate in how the players kind of play out those different historical roles and the different abilities that they have to kind of match and counter each other across the way, and how the different factions have different abilities where they can work together or work against each other. And again, wonderful, amazing part of history. Asymmetric games are the thing. If you have not played enough of these, you absolutely should, because it really gives you the experience of how different dynamics kind of operate together and apart from each other. And it's a game that actually has different types of games in that one game. So if you play different roles, you get to play a slightly different game, and I think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, this game really jumped out at me as like something I'm just immediately interested in. And like, there's the historical element and where we are right now.
Hmm.
Um, but just and I backed it immediately because it seems like a game. It's based in history. It seems like a lot of
Sure.
research was done. Games like that are fascinating to me just from a educational perspective as
Hmm.
as a teacher. Um, but like following the updates and the threads of the campaign has been really fascinating too, because it's not just like here's the stuff we're adding, here's our stretch goals or whatever. It's the history of it, right? Like they're posting like here's what's happening at this time that created this situation,
Sure.
right? The reason why this was such a mess is that several months earlier there were riots in Chicago after Martin Luther King was assassinated,
Yes.
and they were particularly destructive. And so the mayor was just trigger happy, and they went in very quick and very hard, and it created like it's not obviously a lot of people were at fault for the situation, but they escalated very rapidly because of that. And so it's just interesting to read that background, to see like the books and the research that they're drawing from, like the congressional report that was written after all this happened, and how they used that document to kind of guide them in building the game. It's not just like this is a cool theme, let's make a game around it. Like, no, let's go read these 20 books and these documents from congressional hearings, and now let's make a game based on like the specific historical situation. And I don't know if the game will be good or not, but I know that it's very well researched, and that alone makes it interesting to me. So
Yes.
thematically, immediately caught my attention. Historically, it seems to be very strongly based on what actually happened at the time. Um, it's a shame that the backer level is still as low as it is.
Yes.
I would at this point, like this type of historical game, I feel like has a little bit more of a following, but they're just at 37,000, just 500 backers.
Yeah.
There's like a couple of weeks left, but I would have figured this last week would be their big week with the actual convention going on.
Sure.
So I don't know if any of that stuff is interesting to you. I'd say check it out. I can't vouch for it. I haven't played it, but I'm just fascinated by what the game is doing and how it was developed.
Yeah. Even if this particular time in history and the dynamics, just forget all that. Take a look at the gameplay. Take a look at
Mm,
the asymmetric factions that are in play and how they play out. Like, look into the mechanics. Like, the brilliant thing about Euro games and just these kind of crunchy cube pushers and things like this are sometimes, and most of the times, in fact, especially back in the day, the mechanics were so rich and dynamic. Forget about thematic. I mean, obviously they're very thematic here too, and that's a plus. But the gameplay seems like so much fun here. It's You could strip out the theme here. I know you wouldn't want to, obviously, because again, it's really connected to the gameplay. But I love the asymmetrical work here. I love the area control, the tableau building. So there's a lot to love, is what I'm leading to here.
yeah.
All right, so that's our games that we hope, our acquisitions, getting to the table. All right, Anthony, that leaves us with our at the tables this week. We'll let people know if those games are a buy and they should run out and pick those games up. If those games are a play and they should avoid them. If those games are a dodge and they should absolutely not play them. Or if the games are the dreaded burn. What'd you play this week?
All right. So I got a new game in from a Kickstarter campaign that ran not too long ago, like early this year, I think. Maki Master. This
Mm-hmm.
is from Kids Table BG, designed by Josh Capel and Adam Gertzbein. And so these are designers who have, since they originally developed the game that this is, which was called Wasabi back in 2008, have released a whole bunch of games for Kids Table. So Diced Vegetables, Food Fighters, Haunt the House, like a bunch of stuff that's come out in the last few years. Maki Master is like, it's a new game, but it is an old game at the same time. And the only reason they changed the name is because there was a trademark dispute for the use of the name Wasabi. Some other game named Wasabi, they said we have a trademark, and they're like, fine, we'll just change it, whatever. And I fully understand that. I just recently had to change the name of my business because of a trademark issue as well. So this stuff happens all the time. The game itself, we did play this. I don't know if you played this with me or not. Did you play this,
I believe
Wasabi?
so. Yeah,
Okay.
sure.
So we played this back in Myriad days.
Oh
This is
my
where I
God, way back
discovered
when?
the game.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the game is 2008. And so 2013, I'm playing the game. And I was like, oh, this is really good. And I was thinking to myself, I should go find a copy. And then it didn't exist. It was already out of print because it was Z-Man Games. So they printed like the 1,200 copies they made, and then that was it. It's been out of print ever since, and it's like way back in the back of my head is like, I want to get that game someday. It came up on Kickstarter. I backed it immediately, and the rest is history. Here we are. So the game came in recently. I got a chance to play it a few times because it's relatively short, and it definitely feels like I remember it. I can't tell you for sure what they changed, because I don't remember really the game I played 12 years ago, but the base mechanics feel the same. And so what you have is you have a tableau that is shared amongst the players. It's a big grid based on the number of players, how big the grid is. On your turn, you're going to take a tile of your choice from among many different available tiles, and you're going to place it into the tableau, right? The shared tableau. So let's say you're like, I'm going to take daikon, I'm going to put it out there somewhere on this tableau. What you're trying to do is get the ingredients in the correct order to match the recipes you have in your hand. So maybe you have a recipe that says you need rice, daikon, and cucumber, right? They can be in any order, but if you get them in the exact order, you get a bonus. That's obviously hard to do because everybody else is also putting things on the mat and occasionally moving things. So you need to have some flexibility, some diversity. And on your turn, you're also going to want to take these action cards that allow you to kind of manipulate the table and maybe sometimes break the rules. So some of these cards let you place a second tile or cover up another tile or swap tiles. There's teacups on the mat where you can swap those around as well. And so ultimately, like, the game is who can manipulate this space the most effectively to complete the most of these recipes to score the most points. There's some other stuff going on there, like there's little wasabi cubes that you get at various points for completing your recipes, or sometimes just for as your extra action instead of completing a recipe or taking a card, maybe you just take the extra wasabi from the bowl. But ultimately, it's about where are you going to place that tile and how can you both benefit yourself and mess up somebody else at the same time while not knowing what their recipe cards are, right? Like, that's the trick of it. Um, the Kickstarter version, Maki Master, this one here, has 4 mini expansions in it. Haven't really played around with those too much, so I can't like speak to like this one's good and this one's bad. Really just like played the base game a few times and played the solo mode. But it's as good as I remember. I have a lot of fun with it. It's really quick and easy, and yeah, it's frustrating at times because there's that, like, you can only plan so much. It's incredibly tactical because you might have everything lined up and somebody comes in and reshuffles everything or places a tile on top of one of yours with one of their cards, or just bends it in some way, and then all of a sudden you can't complete your recipe and you're like, ah, come on. Like, um, but the game's 30 minutes long, so whatever, it's fine. I don't know. I think it's great. It's a good weight of a game for families as well. Although I will say, because of those elements, if you have a child prone to frustration in games, especially games with like a lot of interaction, beware that there's a lot of frustration to be had here. Like, you can set everything up perfectly for yourself, and someone else can definitely mess it up. So, and sometimes not even on purpose, which makes it even worse because you're like, "You messed me up," and I'm like, "I don't know how. I'm sorry." um, but yeah, Maki Master is great. It's like it's the definition of a buy because it's a game I loved a long time ago. I bought it and I'm happy I did. So Maki Master, I don't know if it's in retail yet. It just shipped. Like I just got this in like last week and played it right away. Um, but I'm sure it'll be at conventions and stuff. And it's not like a big complicated Kickstarter production. It's relatively straightforward. So you should be able to find a copy relatively soon, I would imagine. So Maki Master, check it out. That's a buy for me.
Excellent. It's good to see that they've updated the game, but kept the fun.
Yeah, it feels the same. And I honestly I don't remember what could have changed. I didn't really dig into it on Board Game Geek to see, but I figured let's just review it in isolation. It's a good game.
Yeah, it kind of fits. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, Anthony, you and I are big Civ fans. We like to play Civilization. I think there was recently an announcement about the new Civilization game coming out, the video game.
Civ
Yeah.
7 coming in February, yeah. And for Mac, so we can play.
Oh my goodness, so excited.
I know, I'm excited too.
You can actually play a game on the Mac now.
Yep.
That's the novelty of all novelties. Our civilization has advanced so much so that you can actually play a game on a Mac. Yeah. The days happen. The days happen, my friends. Well, I'm a huge Civilization fan. I love playing through these historical moments. I love the idea that you have a game that progresses through the different eras. So I love myself a tech tree, and there's so many good games with tech trees, and the idea of this kind of scaffolding, snowballing, just dynamic that goes on. Like, hey, I did a thing a couple rounds before, which allowed me to do these new cool things now. Wow, that was so great. Or, oh, I chose that action, and now my civilization's going down a military path. And all right, I got to follow it until, oh, wait, I need to pivot because the other civilization is doing something else that's kind of challenging me. Love that idea. Love the dynamic. Really, it just the thematic feel of it just feels right. So I was excited when I heard so many good things about The Path of Civilization came out in 2023, and a lot of people were raving about this game. In particular, the production was very good, and it has a lot of simultaneous play, which is also very good in a board game because a lot of times that kind of can hunker people down while you watch everyone take their turn and move up the different tech trees. And you're like, oh, that was fun. I saw you move up a tech tree. This game is about civilization, right? Kind of, not really. And I've I don't know what. Yeah. All right. So you're making choices that makes your civilization prosper, according to the game. It doesn't matter which path you take. Clearly, that's a thing because it's a very, very abstracted, pasted on theme. As long as it leads your people to glory. Research new technologies improve your nation's science, military strength, spirituality, culture, and industry. So, let me talk about the game itself. You have your 5 tech trees, and I mentioned, what the particular, thematics are, but they're not really thematics. It's colors. It's green, orange, blue, red, and brown. You have your little markers there, and basically what you're going to do is at the start of the game you gain 5 cards. These 5 cards are identical for everyone, and what you do with these 5 cards, again, each of these 5 cards represent one of the different tracks. You will play 4 of these 5 cards to your board. There's a left side of the board and a right side of the board. So at the start, you're only going to have one symbol on the right side. If you put that on the right side, it's going to give you a boost on a particular color track that matches the cards. So right at the start, you have to decide where your civilization's going. As these tracks go up, you're going to be able to and required to, at the end or at the beginning of each round, purchase a new technology card. So you start with pretty lousy technology, but as the game goes on, you're going to get more powerful versions of the same color cards that you were able to move up those particular tracks. Sounds fine, sounds great, but inevitably as the game goes on, you're just putting those symbols out again and again to move up those different tech tracks and then purchase almost identical card but with maybe one or two more symbols on it, and then you do get a bonus based upon what track that you pull. Now on the left side of the cards you will find a lot of different icons to be able to move up, again, the same kind of tracks. There's the military, there's the building engineering track, there's the leader track, and again, yellow track for scoring points and blue track for the spirituality philosophy track. Those give you cubes. So you want to have those icons on the left side to gain you more cubes, and that will allow you to move down more tracks, a military track, a spirituality track, and also to be able to purchase wonders and purchase leaders. Again, in theory, this should be the most fun game, a quick, civilization game. But again, there's no thematic appeal here. There's just general pictures with icons on it. And there's no real true progression because you have to let a track build up enough to be able to purchase a high value card. And then you have to get enough of that symbol again by placing that card out to move that track up to purchase another card. There's nothing as far as like a certain technology leads to another technology or branches off, or my military's going really well, but you have a certain technology that kind of counters that or matches up with that. Now, all of this goes on throughout the game, and then really what you're dealing with throughout the game is these different cards that are somewhat randomly selected, and during each stage, something scores. In the first two stages, nothing scores, but then eventually there'll be a card that scores based upon certain colored tracks, then a military, certain colored tracks, military, certain colored tracks, military, so on and so forth. I've played this game, I think at this point, at least a dozen times. The production is nice. The fact that the cards fit into these little slots. There's meeples.
There's meeples.
The leaders don't like to play a leader. You have to give up the previous leader that you have. The wonders kind of, you can purchase multiple wonders. Doesn't matter where they're located. Doesn't really matter. They just score you points or move you up tracks. It's been a very long time, honestly, because we've been reviewing stuff for a very long time. It's been a very long time since I've been so disappointed in a game. And back in the day, we used to talk about like, hey, this game has pasted on, it's just a pasted on theme on top of just like icons and mechanics. That has not been the case for a very long time until now. And you know what, to be honest, like I just talked about, the Kickstarter, sometimes the theme doesn't matter. The mechanics are so good. The mechanics are not good here. They're just very boring, very thin. And I wanted to like this game so much. So many people like this game, and I please try to tell me what I'm missing here. But pasted on theme, boring mechanics, and nothing really special about this game. So, Path of Civilization, I'm going to give it a dodge.
All right. Dozen plays, huh? Why?
It does play very fast.
Okay.
So if I do have to recommend something, it does play incredibly fast. Like it says, it has simultaneous play. So once you all play your cards out, you all do the different things as far as move up the tracks, you purchase the cards in the middle. So, but it's just not worth it. Sorry.
Yeah. I yeah, I think we talked about this before. Like, I love me a Civ game, but I don't like me a super abstract Civ game that doesn't get the mechanics right. Like, it's got to do what it's supposed to be doing. Or if it's not going to do what it's supposed to be doing, it should do something very interesting from a Euro perspective, and use the civing as a theme.
Yes.
Like, I'm not like, oh, it has to. If it's not a full 4X, it's not a Civ game. I don't care.
Sure.
If it seems to be good, like we got this feedback when we reviewed Tapestry.
Sure,
My problem with Tapestry was not that it wasn't a good Civ game. My problem with Tapestry is that it was kind of broken,
sure.
right? Um, so this sounds like it's maybe not broken, but just not interesting.
It's mechanically not interesting. It's not thematic almost at all. I mean, to talk about abstract civilization games, I love Seven Wonders. I love it. I have the original edition and all of the expansions and a bunch of promos. And I bought the new edition, a bunch of promos. I bought the coins, the metal coins. I bought the wooden inserts. Like I have Seven Wonders Architects, which is not great.
Hmm.
But again, I wanted to, have the whole collection. I have Seven Wonders Duel. Those are very abstract, not super thematic. They're not even really thematic kind of Civ games. So I'm a lover of that. And it somehow Seven Wonders does it well. So much well that I've invested into it, and this just doesn't. This should be a win. This should be an easy win. It's just not.
Hmm.
So if you ever played Seven Wonders, relatively abstract, right, Anthony, as far as the Civ game's concerned, like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah,
symbols and things.
yeah.
But that feels more like a Civ game, and the mechanics are good. The card drafting, the tableau
Hmm.
building is good.
Yeah.
This I don't find that here, so I'm dodging it. Look out! It's coming your way. All
Good
right, so that's
dodge.
everything. That's everything that hit our table or hit us in the head, and we still don't understand what's going on. Now into our feature review. Our feature review this week, of course, the BGA Hall of Fame, the brand new Hall of Fame that is going to induct the 10 best games that, for a couple of reasons, which we'll talk about, have seen the day, shined in the light, and now it's going to ascend like Elysium, right? Do you remember that game
Oh,
Elysium?
I do.
Yes.
That's
So
a
the
deep
game,
cut, man. I like it.
yeah, it's Elysium's mechanic was always like you got some great god cards, and when they were in play, they did a lot of cool stuff for you. But then at a certain point, you had to decide when to ascend those cards to Elysium, and they scored you like points later. But now you had them; they weren't helping you in the game, so to speak. So these are the great games, Anthony. Uh, we've never done this before.
No.
We've had some great lists, some great games, and I think for myself, just speaking for myself, and I think for you too, we've been constantly, if this podcast has been anything, constantly searching for that game, like that great game or those great games that are just like that's my game, that's my thing, that's who I am, that's what I play.
Yeah.
And we've been lucky enough to come through a bunch of great games over the years.
Yeah, I would say each of the games that I chose defines part of me as a gamer.
Hmm.
These are games that at some point were like the sole focus of my attention, and I guarantee you, as a listener to this podcast, you've heard me talk about all of these many times.
Sure.
Um, and those weren't necessarily the criteria that I used to choose them, but when I chose them, I was like, oh yeah, this is perfect. These are the games that really just encapsulate me as a gamer and that are ready to be ascended to the Hall of Fame out of this list.
Yes. And again, we do the top 100 every year. So these games will be, I guess we're mentioning these games now, and we'll probably mention these games in the future as far as being part of the Hall of Fame, but they will not be part of our top 100s moving forward.
No, yeah, so you have to figure out what's going to fill in the gaps.
Absolutely. All right. So let me start up here. So again, it was very hard to pick from this list, but I think we have good reasons for these games to be here and some just brilliant genius as far as board game is concerned. First game for me of the Hall of Fame is one of my games in my top has been in my top 5, has been in my top 10 over the many years. Gets a 10 for me on Board Game Geek. This is Battlestar Galactica: The Board Game from 2008 from Corey Konetska. I am not at all a fan of social deduction games. Like they're fine, but I'm not a fan of them. Like I don't own a lot. I don't want to play a lot. Please don't ask. And Battlestar Galactica, which is based on the new version of Battlestar Galactica, I think around 2001 or so. I was a kind of a fan of Battlestar Galactica, the TV show. I liked it. I'm an old school fan of the original back in the I guess the late 70s, early 80s. The gameplay here, the thematic gameplay here, and this was back in the day when IPs came out and they just were not great, right? If a game
Mm.
was based on an intellectual property, it came out and you're like, oh, I guess that's fine, or it's a Monopoly version of this. So Battlestar Galactica, the new version of Battlestar Galactica, should not have been a good game. It should have been a bad game. It should have been a generic game. It should have been like a silly game. Corey did something fantastic here. The thematic gameplay is so rich and so generous throughout. If you've watched the show, the game is a masterpiece. If you haven't watched the show, the game is still a masterpiece. The different roles, everyone gets a role, everyone gets a particular special ability, and everyone gets a card, whether you're a human or Cylon, and that's secret. So if you're a Cylon, you are going to be sabotaging the multiple missions that you're going to be taking throughout the game. But you're going to be doing that secretively. So you're going to be putting some bad cards in between and creating this kind of paranoia amongst the group. Who is the Cylon? Throughout the game, you could still be human, but turn Cylon throughout the game or be revealed as Cylon throughout the game. And then you're adding to the deck, but the other Cylons don't know that you're a Cylon. And then throughout the game, at certain points, you could be exposed as being a Cylon, as being this robot infiltrator, and you still have an option to continue to play the game. You're not out of the game. You're just playing a different part of the game. Now you're the open attacker in the game. There is spaceships in this game. There's really cool models in this game. This game has amazing expansions that go along with the game. The character's a lot of fun. Anthony and I played this way back in the day, and I still hound him about the fact that I told him who the Cylon was, and his character
Yeah, yeah,
had the
yeah,
opportunity to shoot him,
yeah,
and I was like,
yeah,
Anthony, he's a Cylon,
yeah,
shoot him.
yeah.
And he did not do it, and damn it, why was he playing that character? So, uh, again, fantastic game, wonderful thematic gameplay, great expansions. But the reason why I'm putting in the Hall of Fame because again, it belongs there. It's amazing, but also it's been out of print forever. Now, Unfathomable, the Cthulhu version of this is out there. Not as good thematically, still okay. But Battlestar Galactica, the board game from 2008, in our Hall of Fame.
I agree.
There you
I mean,
go.
this game has never been on my top 100, but I love it. I would still play it any time. It's just not that type of game for me. So
Sure.
I'm on board for this. All right, so my first game entering the Hall of Fame here in 2024 is a game that most recently had fallen into the 60s on my top 100, and that's not an indictment of the quality of the game. It's just that I stopped playing it as much, which tends to have a pretty significant impact on ranking. But it is a game that I feel very strongly about, that I fell in love with the first time I played it, and has consistently been something that like I bought new stuff for. I've upgraded it. I have really strong memories of this with my family, and that's Imperial Settlers.
Mm-hmm.
So this game came out when we were relatively new to the podcast. It was an Origins release before we ever made it to Origins, and I tracked it down almost immediately. We played it with Drew and Daniel,
Mm-hmm.
and we reviewed it like immediately. Like played this game very
Yes.
early on, and I fell in love with it right away. I think I was the only one of the crew. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, and what I learned from that is that it doesn't play very well with four people. It's very long. Um, but what ended up happening is this is the game that introduced me to solo play. Like, there's a lot of games that play solo, even back then, 10 years ago. But this is the one where I was like, oh, there's a solo mode. Oh, I'm home. I just had a daughter. Like, we just had a baby. My son is 3 years old. You know, I can't really get out as much. I can't play as many games. I have a new job. I'm going to play this game. And I have this very strong memory of sitting there playing this game solo at the table behind the couch with Star Wars on in the background, and my son sitting there with his little toy dump truck, picking up the pieces and trucking them around the table and dumping them off in various places. Um, and it's just like the game itself is fantastic, especially like with one or two players, just in terms of like playing through the specific nature of each of the different factions, of which there's like 8 or 9 with all the expansions. I have the big box for it. I have all the content for it. That since then, there's been an entire new version of this game, Empires of the North, which uses basic mechanics and kind of rebuilds it, and that has a bunch of expansions on its own.
Mm-hmm.
There's other stuff within this universe, like Imperial Miners, which is not at all related to the game, but has the same artwork. So they've moved on. They're not making any new content for this. They haven't in a
Sure.
long time. It's been like 5 years. Uh, and I'm happy with that, but it's also at this point a game that doesn't really hit my table anymore. And part of that is that it's dated. There are other Civ type games and tableau builders and card games that do a lot of what this game does better. Part of that is just that because of all the expansion stuff, that it takes a bit of time to organize it and set it up and get it played. Um, but that does nothing to like diminish my love for the game. If somebody showed up to my house tomorrow and said, "Oh, Imperial Settlers," I'd play that. I'm like, done. Let's do it right now. We're doing it. I would love to, and I still play it solo like once or twice a year, just because for the feels, right? So it's a game that it doesn't feel like it has a place like in like the regular rotation anymore, but it's an all-time great for me that I will continue to return to probably forever. So it therefore will ascend out of the list and stop dropping down the list because of lack of play. This at one time a top 10 game, but now it's a Hall of Famer. Imperial
Nice.
Settlers.
Yeah, I lost, like you said, we played the original, but then the other expansions came out,
Hmm.
and there was a lot of expansions, and
There's been 8 or 9, yeah.
yeah, and I always felt bad about that because I thought the game was solid, but I think if from listening to you for many years that the expansions really opened the game up.
Really do, yeah.
And I'm sorry, I started like multiple times. I was like, I am going to buy into this game. I'm going to start buying this and the expansions. This expansion's on sale. This, that, and the other. And just throughout the years, things weren't available. Sometimes the expansions were out of print, and then they decided to like basically reprint and redo it. So I'm like, oh, all right, too late to do that. So sure, yeah, it's a good little game.
Yeah.
Well, one of the games that's just always been on the list, always been in the top 5, give or take, and really has earned its spot just because it's when we talk about tabletop gaming, board gaming especially, there's a handful of games that everyone knows, whether or not they've played it. And I think that's one of the things that makes this game one of the Hall of Fame games. So it's ubiquitous as far as like when we talk about tabletop gaming. This is Twilight Imperium, 4th edition, or better known as TI4. I remember TI3 back in the day where people were playing TI3. It's gonna take multiple days. Like it was just like this thing that was whispered about, but everyone knew about it, but it was so impossible to get to the table. And then TI4 came out and it actually got to the table. And this reimplementation kind of like brought the best pieces together, and they did such an amazing job again. Corey Knitska, again, talking about him, big surprise here. And Fantasy Flight did a great production, like an amazing production. I remember you picking this up at Gen Con, like running to get this when it first came out.
Yeah,
And
which was like a weird decision to make because I'd never played it
yeah,
and never thought we would get it played. And I was like, I'm just gonna go stand in the line. I'm just gonna do it. We're here, why not? And then I
sure.
did.
I remember that conversation too. You're like, yeah, this. And I'm just like, really? You're like, yeah, this. I'm like, all
Why
right.
not? It was literally a why not. There was
Yes.
no like argument for it. It was just why not?
But it's one of those games that everyone knows, even if they have not played it. Everyone respects, even if they've not played it. And once you
Yeah.
play it, you absolutely positively do respect it. And again, for those people who have not played it, it is not as difficult as it looks.
No.
I mean, it does take time. I'm not saying it doesn't, but it's worth your investment. And you do feel like you're playing this epic space opera, right? We love Star Wars, we love Star Trek, we love Battlestar Galactica, and so many other things out there. How is it that an intellectual property created by Fantasy Flight somehow owns Galactic 4X? They do, right? When you talk
Hmm.
about 4X games, the first game you think about and the first game you talk about is TI4.
Yeah.
So even from that perspective, TI4 has earned, you know, everything. Now, the reason why this ascends for me a little bit is I think at this point, this game came out in 2017, that it's earned its place, it's well earned its place, but I'm now waiting for TI5. I feel like
Oh, I don't know,
TI,
man.
TI5's, it's got to happen. I know there's company issues. I know there's bankruptcy issues.
It's not happening. It's not happening.
When it comes out, I'll say it's coming. It's coming. It's coming.
Yeah.
It needs to save the company, Anthony. It's that game
Yeah.
that's going to save the
Yeah.
company.
They did tease new Twilight Imperium content at the
Yes,
in-flight report, but it was very lame and probably just going to be like a book or something.
but if there was something to save the company, wouldn't it be TI5?
Yes,
Isn't that
probably.
the only thing that could, right?
TI5 plus a movie. Do it.
The TI5 movie?
Yeah. Never mind that they have to make up like $300 million in 18 months. Whatever.
Well,
It's fine.
TI5 could do it. I believe in them. All right. Well, there you go. TI4 until TI5 moves up, ascends to the Hall of Fame.
All right. I love that pick. I think it's a great pick. I almost considered putting TI4 in my Hall of Fame entry as well, which obviously would just be overlap and one of us would have to pick another game.
Yep.
But I do try to get this played every year. It hasn't happened in a little while, but there was a short period of time where I played it like 5 times in 6 months. So I'm like, I'm going to do that again. It's really good.
It is.
So for me, my next one is Terra Mystica. And this one's tricky in a couple ways. One is that there are 3 versions of this game now, right?
At least.
My top 100 right now has 2 versions of it in there. I have Terra Mystica and I have Gaia Project.
Mm-hmm.
And now there's Age of Innovation, right? Which just came out last year.
And Terra Nova, right?
And Terra Nova, yeah,
Yep.
which is not nearly on the level with any of those, but it is definitely another version of the game for sure. Mm-hmm. So already Terra Mystica was potentially going to fall off my list, and I was agonizing over it because this is a game that I've loved since the first time I played it back in 2013. This is the first heavy Euro game I ever played. A friend at Myriad had set it up. Like, you want to play this? I'm like, sure. And like literally halfway through it, he's like, you seem to like it. I'm like, yeah. Like, you have a big stupid grin on your face. I'm like, oh, okay. I loved it. It's everything I didn't know I wanted in games, and there it was. Right, like complex decisions, just intricate puzzles to kind of solve, open information, and just trying to do the most efficient thing with that information. Asymmetry, so everybody's solving their own puzzle. Like, it's everything I want in a board game with Terra Mystica. Now, they've iterated on this formula. They've made it better over the years. I like Gaia Project more as a game. Age of Innovation also. But Terra Mystica, like, it embodies everything that I think works in a Euro game, period. Right? Like, if I was going to make my ideal Euro game, it would start with that. And there's other games that I love that kind of build on that. Like Clans of Caledonia for me is a top 30 game, and it builds on the Terra Mystica formula of like taking things off your mat and placing them on the board, right? Same thing with like even Scythe, like has that same mechanic. So it did a lot of things first. It did a lot of things very well. I fell in love with it very early, and it stuck around my list for a long time because of that, even though I don't play it, because there are other versions of the game that play better at lower player counts, that play better at solo. Terra Mystica has a solo mode now. It has a lot of expansions. It's an amazing game with everything together. It's just not the first thing I pull out. But again, similar to Imperial Settlers, I would play it in a second if somebody was like, I'd rather play that one. I'm like, no problem. I love this game. So I want to ascend it to the Hall of Fame because it is an all-time great game. It is a game that has a strong place in my memory and my heart as part of my entry into the hobby, but also it's held up over time really well, to the point where potentially in next month I'm going to have 2 games in my top 100 based on this game.
Sure.
So it's like the predecessor of 4% of my list. So yeah, Terra Mystica, just an amazing game.
What really kind of struck me many years ago was stumbling across Terra Mystica's forum pages and the amount of calculations, formulas, algorithms, and data that people had done to figure out like like how to win this game, right? Like opening moves. Like they had this ascended to a level of play like chess,
Yeah.
right? Like this is the opening gambit. You do this, you do this, you do this, you terraform with this, you move here, and I was just like, and I am done. Like these, just like I'm like, thanks everybody, I'm good. Like I mean, I feel that way about chess too. Like I like chess. I've played chess since I was a little kid. Probably one of the
Yeah.
earliest games I played, and I'm just like, everyone has again. They've ascended this game on their own, and I think
Maybe,
Terra Mystica has done that as well too.
yeah, I mean, maybe that's why this game is so high for me. Like chess is almost this. It feels the same for me.
It
Like I have a
does.
strong emotional connection, but like just the puzzle of that game makes me happy. Every time one of my kids is like, "I want to play chess," I'm like, "Yes, I'm gonna play chess right now." I can't destroy them, but I love that I get to play this. Um, and this game gives me a similar feeling.
And certainly this game, we talk sometimes about I mean, we used to do a lot more. Talk about games with there's strategy games and then there's tactical games.
Yeah,
And this is a strategy game.
100%, hundred
And
percent open information. You can see what everybody's doing it all the time. Yeah,
mhm. And how you do your moves, your stuff is planned out in advance and they take their counter moves and so it's just it's such a beautiful symphony at play and the artwork is fantastic. Like the artwork is just beautiful with the exception of the pieces which are like
yeah,
again I get it. Again we can kind of be kind to it and say it's like chess where it's just
yeah.
very generic basic blocky kind of pieces.
Right. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And honestly, I think this might be the first game I ever played with zero randomness and zero hidden information.
Mhm.
And I think that was novel to me and might have been part of why I was like, wow. So,
And again, like it has its, you know, reimplementations that came out and they should be better.
yeah.
And you
And they
can
are on
they
paper.
yeah.
Yeah.
But again, Terra Mystica does earn that spot. Great
Yep.
pick. All right. Well, again, when we're talking about board gaming, when I talked about TI4, kind of like when you talk about tabletop gaming, you talk about TI4 is generally in that conversation. One of the other games that's in that conversation for being one of the best versions of itself. And in this particular case, a game that kind of was the ultimate multi use card game, right?
Mhm.
Cards that had multiple features to it, multiple paths to victory, right? There's that straight down scoring points, but there is these offshoots where you can plan and build towards different shortcuts to victory. And everyone knew about this game. And it was one of the earliest Kickstarters for its new version. I'm not going to hold back anymore. It's Glory to Rome.
Going home.
And again, that was something that, you know, early on in tabletop gaming, everyone knew Glory to Rome. The basic version was out there, and the black box edition was like epic and legendary, mostly because most of it was destroyed
Yeah, right.
in its Kickstarter. And because of a lot of, you know, reasons, it was not going to be reprinted ever again. So this game came out in 2005. Once again, we had Ed Carter and Carl Chuddik. Um, it's had other reimplementations down the road. You and I Anthony, we kind of backed. I think
Matinai.
Matanai that came out, and it was not as good as Glory to Rome.
No,
And I remember we
not at
picked it up.
all.
We picked it up at Gen Con and we played it. And Carl was there, and we were really excited about the whole thing. I've never gotten my hand on Glory to Rome. If you ever have I mean, I have an auction for like one of the earlier versions, but not the black box edition, which everybody wants. If you haven't played the game, multi-use cards, they do a lot of really amazing, cool things about building the foundation of Rome. And typically, you know, you're building different buildings in Rome that give you special abilities, but there's also the player mat. The player mat has options to tuck cards to the left, to the right, up and down. It's a simply brilliant game throughout. It's been in my top 5, my top 10. It's a great game and does not get played enough. And it's a sad sin that the black box edition never got reprinted. Glory to
It
Rome, my
is.
friend. Glory to Rome.
Glory to Rome is it's such a fascinating game. Every time someone brings it out and says, "Let's play this game," I'm like, I would love to play this game. I love multi-use cards. I love the theme of it. And for whatever reason, and it has nothing to do with the game. I think the game is brilliant. I cannot wrap my brain around the flow of this game. I've played it
Sure.
probably a dozen times over the years, and every time I play it, about 2/3 of the way through, I'm like, "The heck am I doing? What am I doing right now, and why am I losing so badly?" And it's just it's there's a few games that I just my brain is like, "Nope." Um, and yet I still like it, which is how you know it's such a good game.
Yeah.
Like,
We talked about terraforming, sorry, Terra Mystica
yeah,
being all about strategy. This is certainly a tactical game, right?
yeah,
What
yeah.
cards you get in your hand kind of allow you to build towards different paths to victory. There
Mhm.
is that straight general path of just scoring victory points, but the offshoots of it are really keen, and you have to be aware of that throughout the game as where people are going. So yeah, it's the tactical game because you have to pivot a lot.
Yeah, yeah, and that definitely comes through a lot. Such a brilliant implementation, though, and so many games have tried to copy that, and they just
Yeah,
never quite work.
it's. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I love Bruges so much is because of the multi-use cards. But this is
Mhm.
the king of multi-use cards.
Yeah, I just remember playing Import Export, and someone's like, "It's like, Glory to Rome, but with money and ships," and I was like, "Yeah, no."
Yeah,
And, like, it's got the multi-use cards, but, like, that's the
yeah.
heart of it is not there.
No, not at all.
Alright, so my next one, my 3rd one here is a game that it I feel like all these kind of have a common theme, like, they have a special place in my heart, but, like, legit, like, I made a lot of friends through this game, so that it's kind of why, and it's the first time a card game really captured me and pulled me in so deeply since I was 10 years old, and I stumbled upon Magic: The Gathering. Keyforge. So, back in 2018, when Keyforge released, it was they pitched it as like it's the new game from the designer of Magic the Gathering, but all the decks are pre-made. It's all algorithmic, and like all the stuff they pitched on was silly. Like it was all very gimmicky. It was like, hey, we're using an algorithm to build decks automatically, which broke almost immediately, and then we had to sell it to someone else. Like that stuff was whatever. The game itself was brilliant, right? It was you're not paying mana for anything. You have three different factions in your deck. It's all built automatically. You open the deck, there it is. You, on your turn, choose which faction you're going to activate. You can play as many cards as you want from your hand, and you can activate as many cards as you want on the tableau from that faction. And that's it. You can't activate the other ones. So there's a huge luck of the draw element to it. Like if you build up a huge tableau of one faction and then you draw a different one, like you don't have any of those in your hand, you're like, okay, well, I could play no cards this round to activate this one, and then I'm not cycling any cards, or I could play something different and waste that tableau and let my opponent take it out. Like so much stuff to balance and work through, and like the strategy of the game was just so much fun on so many levels, right? And it really was like the first one of these card games that like pulled me in so hard in 20 years at that point. um, Part of that was it was accessible. It was cheap. Like each deck of cards cost $10, and I ended up with a bunch of them, maybe like 50 or 60, and yet it was way less money that I would have spent if I was like, I'm gonna go play Magic right now. Because just to get into that, you would need to spend that much as a baseline, and then you'd be building decks after that. And that was like over the course of 2 years before the pandemic hit that I spent that much money. So it was a great experience. Another part of it though is like there was open play everywhere because it was so accessible. It was so easy to set up. People didn't have to buy special cards. You didn't have to worry about stock. It was just there, right? Fantasy Flight printed a lot of these. They were everywhere. Um, and so open play very close to my house. I met a bunch of friends and we continued to play for years after that. Through COVID, I participated in a tournament online with this game with friends during COVID. And even that was fun, like talking to them remotely online. Um, and the reason why the game is entering the Hall of Fame now, it's just that it's kind of petered out, as all good card games do, except for Magic the Gathering. Um, it they're still releasing content. Ghost Galaxy, which is owned by Christian Peterson, who was the former president of Fantasy Flight before Asmodee bought the company, and he got kind of squeezed out of there. He bought the license. They rebuilt the algorithm. They rebuilt the printing mechanisms. They ran a few game found campaigns. and they're released now 3 sets, I think. And I backed a bunch of stuff from that first set, and it just kind of petered out from there because they kept releasing to GameFound, which undercuts local game stores. Um, OP really hasn't developed anywhere because of that, because there's these stores don't really have a reason to like purchase a bunch of stuff from distribution if everybody has all their stuff already that they bought through this. Like it really narrows down the player base. I don't think you can do a TCG or any type of card game through crowdfunding because you need people to come in looking for the cards and then find each other and play each other in that space. Like they need to be purchasing cards for drafts and so on and so forth. Like if they already all own their cards, like where are they going to play? Um, and so that's the problem. There is no open play around me, and it just like that model doesn't work. The overall flow of it doesn't really work for me. Um, but I still love the game. I still have my deck. I have one deck that I've only ever lost with once. It's like 52-1 that deck. People have offered to buy it from me, and I was like, no, I'm keeping this because it's special. And I haven't used it in a while. And I'm like, maybe I should have sold it. That's like $100 I could have gotten for that. So, um,
Did it
but
have did it have a wacky name?
it's Omdal the Strategic.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Uh, it's just it's a fantastic game, and I wish it was still around. I wish I could still play it as much as I used to, um, and I just don't. But I will always love it. So it elevates to the Hall of Fame because it is not as accessible, not as played, but still a fantastic game.
Yeah, I think, and it's kind of a sad thing because these games obviously live and die by their organized play,
Yeah,
and I joke because it's kind of funny that they had the wacky names that went along with it, but I think it's a really adorable, cute addition because they didn't have to do that. So
no,
so
yeah,
you had the algorithm that built the decks, but you also had the algorithm that built the names too.
yep.
And
And that first set, there were some like not good names
no,
based on very problematic names, and those decks are worth a lot of money because they are bad.
there you go.
So
I still have my deck. I have a deck. I never got
nice.
into it. It didn't pop for me, but it was such a unique, brilliant work from Richard Garfield. And if anyone's going to make a brilliant CCG in a different way, it's him. And I hate to say it, it's just the organized gameplay. I think I
Yeah,
think I think this game would have hooked me if it was out there and popular, but
yeah.
sadly, it earns its spot. I agree. Again, it was a big thing for a minute. All right. Well, one of the games that hit my top 100 all the time, hit my top 10, hit my top 5, hit my top 1 was a game, and a lot of games are like this. The games that I love, the games that have always been in my top 5 have been games that I never in my life would ever have thought that I would have loved them or even liked them or actively avoided them in a lot of cases. And for different reasons, in fact. Dominant Species from Chad Jensen, who sadly passed away in 2019, left us a gem. And this was a big, heavy, crunchy game from GMT that's known for the big, heavy, crunchy games. This game has a 4.04 on the weight out of 5 for Board Game Geek. And this game is so abstract looking that it inspired, I guess, the popular meme joke, the Cones of Dunshare. The game itself is a board of hexes, and a hex board, and then you put hexes on top of those hexes, and there's cones, and there's cubes, and there's little discs that go in between the hexes. And this is absolutely ridiculous as far as the game's concerned. And in no reasonable world universe, I would actually want to play this. And I don't remember how I first played my first game of this or how I was dragged to the table and threatened to play this game. And I played it. And this idea of 90,000 BC with the Ice Age approaching and all of these different animal species, vying for dominance of what land was left as the ice encroaches in. I didn't think it was going to be a thing. I didn't think it was going to be thematic. It didn't look thematic. It looked super crunchy. how could this game have thematic appeal? And you do get to play um, one of these major animal classes: mammals, reptiles, birds, amphibians, arachnid, um, arachnid, I'm sorry, or insects. And each of them plays different. They have a little bit of a different ability, a little bit of their own special power as far as dealing with domination of the different lands. And then how you populate the area, how you take your particular actions is such a brilliant idea. It's a worker placement game. So you're like, that's simple. But now you have to make really challenging dynamic choices because the more powerful actions are on the bottom of the board. But when you place the actions up top, those are the faster things that activate first and typically not as powerful as the ones on the bottom. But as the game goes on and the actions start to take place, you pull your workers so to speak. You pull your pillars off, and then you take that action. So the game state changes dramatically throughout the game as you populate, as you spread, as you attack, as you add tiles to the board. And then there's these domination cards that come into play. And these cards are just amazing. They're fun, they're thematic. It allows you to do different things to the lands, different things to do to different species that branch off and allows you just to mess with other players. So here you had a crunchy, heavy game from a war gamer, like a solid war game designer, but softened it a little bit with Euro mechanics and then somehow brought in this really like Amerithrash mechanic where these cards could wipe out other species with a blink of the eye. It's fun, it's dynamic, it's everything that you want for this big, crunchy, epic game. It rivals TI4 in my mind as far as getting to the table and enjoying it. But at this point, before Chad Jensen passed away, he left us with Dominant Species Marine in 2021. It's a little bit lighter, just a little bit. It's a little bit faster, and it's a little bit higher rated. The artwork is a little bit more dynamic. The graphic design is a little tighter. His rule books have always been great. Rule books even better here. The new version of the game gives you it plays differently without going into full detail because this is all about dominant species, not dominant species marine. But since we have dominant species marine, it gets more table time. But dominant species will always be special and classic. I know you and I played this a lot, Anthony. So dominant species, Hall of Fame.
Yeah, great pick. Great pick. I think for me, I don't know if it was your first play. I just remember playing it for the first time at DexCon.
Mm-hmm.
We ran into a listener and their partner, and we ended up sitting. We're like, "Oh, we'll play this," and they're like, "How long?" I'm like, "How long is it?" And they're like, "About 3 hours." I'm like, "Okay, we have time for that." And we sat down to play it in like an empty room under the staircase in the hotel, and we were down there for 5 or 6 hours to the point where someone came in and like, "We need this room for something." And we didn't actually finish that first game we played because we had to get up and leave. So,
Sure.
and I was like, "Oh, this is a game. This
This
is
is a
an
game.
epic game." Which I immediately was like, I have to track this down. I need to play it again
Yeah.
because it was so much fun. All right. So next one for me, getting down to the bottom here, Spirium, which I may have mentioned on this show a couple times.
The tattoos that says it all.
Right, yeah. The dour Englishman with holding the green gem on my forearm. So this is currently number 6 on my list and has been in my top 10, I think, forever. And for good reason, right? The game is fantastic. It's quick, it's accessible, it's easy to teach. You're building at a tableau that it's unique every time you play. The mechanism of like choosing when to stop taking actions or placing workers and start removing them is unique to each player. There's no round necessarily in this. It's just everybody kind of chooses when they want to go. And when somebody chooses to go, it can push everybody else to go. So the flow of every round is unique because of that push pull element. The race to get more uh, victory points so you can get more resources and you can get more money and you can get more workers. Because if you reach those different thresholds, you unlock different things. It's very, very fascinating, and it's a compelling in the way it forces you to interact with the other players. I love Euro games that give you the strategy and give you the puzzle, but also force you to go out and interact with everybody else and worry about what they're doing, right? There's no point in this game where any action you take is not dependent and at the same time impacting on other people. I place a meeple here. Now that action you want to take costs one more, right? You place a meeple there. Now I can't afford this action I want to take. So that push and pull is so cool. And there's like a press your luck element because of that. Like, how long can I wait? If I wait long enough, will you start removing your meeples and maybe take different cards than the one I want, so the one I want becomes cheaper? Or should I just get in there and start pulling stuff off so I can get something out of this? Um, it's such a good experience. The one thing, the one thing that always held this game back from greatness, I think, for a lot of people, including myself, but I love it anyways, is just that last round of the game. The C cards are all the same. There's only 9 of them. They all come out. So if you've played the game even once or twice, you have a huge advantage over new players because you know what those last 9 cards are going to be. Like when I teach the game, I show everybody, here's the last 9 cards, but even then, it doesn't always mean anything. I would have loved more variability, more cards. A very small expansion would have made this game just even more amazing, and other people would have come to it. And I
Mm.
know they would have. Um, I've been hoping and praying for like a Kickstarter of this game for years, right? And William Adia does not make a lot of games, but there was a new version of Kalis not too long ago. So why not a new version?
Get that. Could you try again?
As my watch goes off. So why not a new version of Spirium to go with it? And yet it just hasn't happened. So I'm putting this in the Hall of Fame for 2 reasons. One is that I think I've talked about it enough. If you don't know that I love Spirium, that you should try it at this point. I don't know what else I could do. 2, it's a game that's not going to hit the table as much as I'd like because it's old and it's ugly, right? It's not a pretty game. It was only $30 when it came out. The components reflect that. And it's really hard to get played unless someone's like actively interested in it. Like, oh, I've always wanted to play that. I'm like, good, we're playing it. It also doesn't play great with like two players. So you can't just have one person say they're interested. You need a whole table of people to say they're interested. So there's a lot of barriers to getting it played, and it just continues to not get that reprint that I really think it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
If it ever does get the reprint, I might break the rules and bring it back into the list and just say like it's the 2027 version. It's fine. It's different. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully they call it like Spirium 2, like they did with Glenmore. Like,
Electric Boogaloo.
exactly, like Spirium 2. It's all new. But for now, Spirium 1 is going into the Hall of Fame. All-time great game. Opening up a big spot in my top 10. I'm excited to see what fills it.
I think if it came out again in a new version, people were like, "Hey, you're stealing from Nuculum."
Yeah, probably. And that would be really annoying because this was the first Euro game with a completely random theme that also happens to have green cubes for no reason. It's fine. It's honestly, I think the game was probably coal mining, and they said make it green because it's more interesting, and it wasn't more interesting, and people did not buy it anyways.
Yeah, that's interesting. If it was not Nuculum, if it was not the green cubes, would it be less? I don't know. Like
Yeah.
that steampunk thing is always been a big thing out there. That had a
Mhm.
steampunk feel to it. I know it's not steam necessarily, but it had that kind of look.
Yeah, it's like the whole Tesla thing, like in Barrage.
Yes.
Barrage is a game about like just building dams, but they're like, what if Tesla did some weird stuff with the electricity? Like, oh, okay, that's
Tesla?
interesting. Yeah,
It's the Cthulhu of the Euro game universe.
yeah, right.
How
Tesla.
about a little Tesla? That'll round it out.
Yeah.
All right, for my final game, this has certainly been my number one game of all time, several years, and it's kind of hard to watch this game ascend because it has been so meaningful as far as the actual gameplay is concerned, but also because of all the things it could do. This is Defenders of the Realm, from 2010, from the designer Richard Lanius and the artist Larry Elmore, in the great production from Eagle Griffin Games. What was amazing about this game when it first came out and for so many years afterwards, that games had a hard line split down the road where it was like it's either a Euro game or it's an Ameritrash game. Like never shall the two meet, right? It's either theme or mechanics. You like your fantasy games? Great. It's not mechanically fun. You like your mechanically sound games, not thematically fun. Defenders of the Realm came out and was like, hey, you remember that pandemic theme? Nah, didn't like it so much. Well, how about we take the great mechanics from Pandemic and put it in a supercharged fantasy game with amazing artwork from Larry Elmore. And it was amazing. It was, and it went beyond just being a pandemic game as far as the mechanics is concerned. And it went beyond just having great artwork. They really took their time in order to ensure that the different role play characters, it's different fantasy characters, the elves, the dwarves, all the different types of characters, the hero characters that you could play as, actually really had unique powers and abilities that you would find in a role play game. And to be able to employ these different role play character abilities in a tabletop board game was amazing. And you didn't have that back in the day. But Rich Alanius, who also created Arkham Horror, knew about really embedding that kind of thematic gameplay. So I was playing a role playing game, but it was a tabletop game. And again, from when it came out, it had over 100 miniatures in the game, a lot of plastic. That was fun. You had these really cool minion figures that operated as the generic tokens, and they kind of spread out, and you felt like you were fighting back this evil. And it had dice rolling. I know now in the day of Gloomhaven, the idea of rolling dice to fight minions is the last thing you want to do. But still, to this day, there's something about rolling dice as an action to attack. And now you have a whole team. It's a cooperative game. So you're all rolling dice against this big demonic or dragon general and trying to get the right rolls. And there's been so many times where we've leapt out of our seats, where we cheered other people on in their dice rolls, and it's just been a wonderful experience. This game has had multiple expansions, especially for all the different fantasy hero characters you get to play as. And there's been a lot of different monsters, mostly dragons throughout, which have been great, adding different ways to play with the game. There's a lot of hero cards and special abilities. The new expansions allow you to create a character from scratch. Just a lot of different aspects of this game that's been so beautiful throughout the way. But over time, it's aged. It and shows elements of its age with its plastics miniatures not living up to the current plastic. Some of the gameplay elements not being as dynamic as the current ones, and of course, it's getting I guess, a re-implementation from Greater Than Games. I don't know if that version will be better than this, but this has been the best version of this type of game forever. So it deserves to ascend, and hopefully, we played it recently. Hopefully, you still get some play out there, but it's seen its age in a lot of ways. So it's moving on up to the east side, to the deluxe apartment in the sky.
Yeah. I will say, like, when we played it at Dexlight, it was very exciting to get this to the table because it had been a long time for me personally. I know you love the game; you probably played it more often.
Yes,
but like I hadn't played it in a long time, and I was like, "Is this still good?" Like I remember, like, yeah, it is. This is cool. Yeah, it's because it's not just like move, roll, move, roll, move, roll, which is like a lot of like D&D style, like old school dungeon crawly fantasy board games. It has the tactical strategic elements to it of a good solid cooperative game like Pandemic, but like with better theming. It's so good.
And the different fantasy characters that you can play as, because it's a co-op game, it plays differently, right? Maybe you want somebody to be a more of a support character. Maybe you want the healer. Maybe you want the assassin. Maybe you want, the eagle, the rider that moves quickly. I think you were playing the centaur, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she was great because she was able to pick off, enemies at a distance.
Yeah.
So there is some strategic gameplay as far as what kind of group are you building together to deal with this quest in this battle. And I love that about D&D just generally. We need a healer, we need a tank, we need some DPS and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's so good. It's so good. All right. So for my final ascension here, I'm gonna go with the big one, the one that
Uh
everybody's like, when are you gonna replace this game? Um, and this one goes back to the Christmas of 2013 when a good friend of mine named Chris
what?
uh,
Who?
got me a copy of War of the Ring, second
What
edition.
a guy! I like that guy.
Such a good guy. And I opened it and I was like, I don't know what this is because I was like, yeah, we had a podcast, but I wasn't enough into the games yet to be like, is this good? And then I learned it and then we played it and I was like, no, it's not just good. It's transcendently good. um, so when the first time we did a top 100, this was my number one and it has been ever since. And it's like I'm a Lord of the Rings guy, but I'm not like the Lord of the Rings guy, right? I've kind of come around to it honestly more as I've gotten older. I think when I was younger, I didn't have the patience for it as much. And as I've aged, I'm like, Lord of the Rings is such an interesting, fun world. I'm like, I read the books, I rewatch the movies every year, and I play this game, right? It is a almost near pitch perfect representation of the theme in board game format. And I don't think any other board game does that as well as War of the Ring. A lot of them do it extremely well, and a lot of them are going to stay on my list going forward. Um, but none of them do it quite as well as this game, where you have one faction playing the Free Peoples and sending the Fellowship along, hidden down the path, trying to get to Mordor, and you have the other side playing the Shadow and trying to stop them while also conquering the cities. The Shadow has more dice and more actions, but the Free Peoples have like more tactical, strategic options to kind of like weave through all of the different things that they can be done against them. It's so incredibly thematic. It's so incredibly interesting. Every decision you make is interesting. There's no throwaways. You're not like, I don't know, I guess I'll throw a troop over here. It's like, no, everything you do is important, right? And war games are not always like that. Sometimes, again, like you're just like, all right, I got 3 cards that put troops on the left side of the map. I'm not doing anything on the left side of the map. I don't know, whatever, this one, right? That's not what this game is. You're always doing something that's important. You're always pulling cards that are interesting. You always have figures you can place out that are going to allow you to do more interesting things. And the game is almost always tense until the end. Like I've maybe played once out of a couple dozen plays over the last few years where it did not get to that final, like maybe not right at the step of Mount Doom, but down into Mordor. Like, can we pull it off? We are there. We're on that final track. Can Frodo and Sam get the ring into Mount Doom? And just like that tension is there. You can feel it. It's like the end of Return of the King, where everything's happening at once. And you're like, is it gonna work? Is it? Right? Um, and the game just captures that so perfectly well. So this is a game I've invested a lot in over the years. Maybe not the highest amount because I can't afford the $4,000 for that special edition. But I do have like the expansion, the current one, the Warriors of Middle Earth special edition. I pre-ordered the Kings of Middle Earth that comes with the Lords of Middle Earth special edition. I have this. I have the playmat. I have the giant boards. I have the special rule book. Um, if I play this game, it is an epic experience. I have like 3D models of the two towers. It's by far my favorite gaming experience ever, and every time I play it, I feel it again. The reason I'm putting it in the Hall of Fame is there's a few reasons. At a very base level, it's this game will always be number one, and that's not always a good snapshot of where I am. Right? Yes, this is the game I would most like to play at any given time, but it's also not the game I can play at any given time. Um, it's if I teach it to a new person who's not played it before, it takes several hours, like 5 or 6 hours to teach it and play it and to understand it. And you really need to play it twice because you need to play both sides. It's too long in that case. If you've played it a bunch, the game's much faster, right? Because you don't have to go through all that learning and you kind of just shuffle through the early stages of the game because the early stages are they're not scripted necessarily, but there's a good sense of what to do and where to go. So I've never really like landed on a partner who loves this game as much as I do that where we can play it over and over again. 2, I do have all these wonderful expansions. I think I've played maybe one of them or 2 of them a couple times. It's very, very difficult to get those played unless you have a steady partner to play the game with. They've also said they're pretty much done with it. We're not getting more stuff. We also have War of the Ring, the card game now, which I don't think is better. for me personally, but it is way more accessible, right? I can play it more easily, even though it requires 4 people. It's faster, it's easier to teach. It has the solo mode with the Against the Shadow expansion, and it's a more accessible game. Battle of Five Armies, also shorter, not better, but very good, and a little bit more accessible as well. So there's just a lot of different ways to kind of approach this particular type of game, both from a Lord of the Rings standpoint and mechanical standpoint, which we'll get into with our top 100 over the next few weeks. And so this doesn't get played as much, and that makes me sad, but it just is what it is. Like it's a hard game to get to the table. Um, and another big piece of it is just, how long can it stay at number one, right? How long can this game be the only game that I'm espousing, even though I don't play it that much, right? So like there are other games I play more often that I'm more interested in, that have been more compelling, like from a smaller moment in time perspective. I think this game deserves to be in the Hall of Fame because it will always be one of my favorite games of all time, or if not be my favorite. Even if I go a year or two without playing it, it will still be up there. But that kind of removes it from consideration on a yearly basis of my current snapshot of favorite games. So, War of the Rings Second Edition, one of the greatest games ever made. Absolutely adore it. Will gladly spend $500 or $600 if they re-release a special edition.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely would do it. But in the meantime, going into the Hall of Fame.
It's an outstanding game. It's always been in my top 5. And I think if you didn't put in your top 1 at some, consistently, I probably would have.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the brilliance of the game is you could be a Lord of the Rings fan and just love every minute of this, but also not be a Lord of the Rings fan and love every minute of this.
Right? It's such a good game outside of the
it's
theming.
beyond. It's really just
Yes.
it's beyond it. And I think if you play this game, I think you'll love the movies even more, and the book even more, because to play those things out. Now, I think the really interesting thing about this game is they could have put this on rails, right? If they really wanted to safeguard the game, they could say like, "Oh, you'll play all the different elements and the different steps of the movies and the books and stuff like that." And it would have been a lot safer for them to do that. Like, "Oh, now they do this and this." That's not the game. The game is, here are all the elements of the book, of the lore, of the story, and now tell your own story. And it plays out differently. It still has the same goal, but maybe maybe the elves or a certain faction doesn't come to your aid. Maybe you decide that, as Mordor, you want to attack, the elves first. Like, there's just so many different ways to play the game and different stories that you can tell. I think that's so interesting and dynamic. I mean, we would not have Star Wars Rebellion without this game. So again, the idea of you get to play the story, but you get to make it your own and get to tell your story. And I remember so many times playing this game, and like, each game is different. This game, I got these cards in the hand, so I decided to go with this kind of a strategic tactical gameplay. And it's fantastic. And again, like you mentioned, the special edition game, like the holy grail of tabletop gaming to this day.
Dude, seriously, I would sell half my collection to get that. And then it would be that, like, every time I see something, like, no, we're playing this. No, we're playing this game.
We're playing
I spent
this.
$5,000.
This is what we do now.
This is all we do. It is a transcendent experience, which is why it now transcends to the Hall of Fame.
There you go. All right, everyone. Well, again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for joining us. And hopefully you've gotten these games to the table. If you haven't, you absolutely positively should. These are our Hall of Fame games, not to be mentioned in the next upcoming episodes. So we'll be counting down our top 100 each and every week. We're doing a little differently this time. We're not going to do it in 1 or 2 episodes. We're actually going to take our time and break down 10 each on each episode. And again, with a thanks to all the wonderful designers, artists, writers, the production companies, everyone who's involved with all these Hall of Fame games. Thank you so very much for adding so much to our lives. Until next time, this is Chris.
And this is Anthony.
And we'll save you all at Seat at the Table. Take care, everyone.